So knowledge and information. We've covered a number of different articles about how words are funny things and can have multiple meanings. The word know is no different in this regard. As a word by itself or in a phrase, it can be used to describe a number of different things. These are the most common ones: knowledge, information, awareness, and certainty or uncertainty. Therefore, it can be said that you know something, but at the same time do not hold knowledge. This can indeed be confusing. So what is knowledge? There are many theories of knowledge which we have covered in Knowledge and Certainty. With all of these theories of knowledge, it's essentially a firm, rigorous, well-justified belief about something true. Knowledge is a subset of belief. A belief is simply something that you accept as true, think most likely, a positive attitude towards a proposition. I think the bridge will hold my weight is the same as I believe the bridge will hold my weight. You can have many types of belief: unjustified, irrational, irrational, justified, rational, etc. As mentioned, there are many theories of knowledge, but essentially it's a firm, rigorous, well-justified belief about something true. Having a belief doesn't entail knowledge. That is to say, when you believe something, you don't necessarily know it. But holding knowledge entails to belief. That is to say, when you have knowledge, you also have belief. Consider, I know I'm human, but I don't believe I am human. It's ridiculous, right? I mean, what do you believe you are then? But the other way around, I believe I will wake up tomorrow, but I don't know I will wake up tomorrow. That makes sense. So knowledge entails belief because it is a subset or type of belief. It follows that if we understand to have knowledge, we have to have belief. We can also understand if we lack a belief, we are lacking knowledge. However, if I say, I believe I will wake up tomorrow, do you really want me to qualify that with, but I don't claim to know that? It's completely surplus to dialogue, and we shouldn't assume a knowledge claim until someone says, I know X is true. But even then, they might be conflating knowledge with certainty. What is information? So information is simply contextualized data or facts. I can tell you that evolution is a fact, or that the sky is blue, and you can hold this information and repeat it. But if you don't understand the mechanisms of evolution or why the sky appears blue to our eyes, this wouldn't really be knowledge. Consider the square root of 196. The answer is 14. This is true. You now have this information, and you might even believe it to be true, but if you don't understand how square roots work, can you really say that you're holding knowledge? Another example I often see thrown around the internet is how 0.999 recurring equals 1. Some folks might outright reject this even after seeing various ways it works. Others might say they accept or know the answer, but they still don't believe it. This says they're either holding a contradictory belief, which is quite difficult to maintain, or they don't really accept the answer and they just acknowledge the information and that's what people say the answer is, but can't fully justify it to themselves. So as I've mentioned it, I'll do a brief demonstration. On the left-hand side, we have the algebra version. If x equals 0.999 recurring, 10x is 9.9999 recurring. 10x minus x would then equal 9. 9x equals 9. X equals 1. 0.999 recurring equals 1. And through fractions, we can also see a third is the same as 1 divided by 3. 1 divided by 3 is 0.333 recurring. A third times 3 equals 0.33 recurring times 3. A third times 3 equals 1. 0.333 recurring times 3 is 0.9999 recurring. Therefore, 0.9 recurring is 1. So now that you have this information and the math checks out, you can even ask a math teacher or put it in a calculator and you'll get the same answer. So this information is also true. And as you have the information, you might say that you know that 0.9 recurring equals 1. If you don't understand this fully, you might not believe it, even though you have the information and know what the answer is. Without an understanding, I'm not sure you can fully justify your knowledge. And if you don't believe the answer is actually true and are just aware that it is considered true, then again, I'm not sure you can call this knowledge, or even a belief for that matter. So if you don't believe that 0.99 recurring equals 1, that means you're either uncertain of the answer, or you actually believe the answer is something else. So this too would show that you don't have knowledge. Any questions before I move on to awareness?
Nope, nothing from the chat so far.
Cool. So awareness. Awareness can be linked to information in the sense that you're aware 0.9 recurring equals 1, or you're aware of the stories in the Bible, but you might not have knowledge as to if they definitely did or did not happen. It can be used in a different way too. It can be linked to an emotional or sensory. Emotionary. Gotta love dyslexia. I know someone is watching me. This could easily be described as an irrational belief, something you just feel with no real reasoning behind it. What you're really saying is, I'm aware of my feelings of being watched, rather than any actual knowledge of being watched. The only thing that could really be considered knowledge here is you knowing what you are feeling. Certainty. Know can also deal with certainty. Whilst epistemic certainty is considered on par with or even above knowledge, when folks are speaking of certainty, they usually mean psychological certainty. When we speak of psychological certainty, we, roughly, are speaking about the strength of a belief. A belief is what we think true, most likely, but we might only be 5% certain, or we could be 90% certain, for example. So mixing psychological certainty and I don't know, when folks say, I don't know, they are usually meaning things like, I'm unsure or I'm uncertain, I'm unconvinced, I have not made up my mind, I lack confidence. So when you're thinking about the proposition God exists, that's what it's sort of talking about if someone says, well, I don't know. In fact, it can be said that this sort of uncertainty is akin to the term agnostic, known as weak agnosticism, or the psychological state of being agnostic. This is also known as suspending judgment, not believing X is true or false. With this use, you're lacking belief both ways. There is already a lack of belief, which, as we previously discussed, entails a lack of knowledge. Whilst this lack of certainty would usually entail a lack of knowledge, when used to mean a lack of confidence or similar, it could mean that whilst they did have knowledge of something, it's shaken them up and made them doubt themselves. For example, consider someone who has spent a lot of time studying. They have an exam they have been studying for and have studied so hard they should easily ace the test. On the day of the test, through pressure, worry, stress, etc., they've found themselves doubting if they would succeed. They've lost some of their psychological certainty. They ended up getting 100%, which showed that they had epistemic certainty even where the psychological certainty was lacking. Even though this dip in certainty seems to show they had knowledge without belief, they still believed the answers they were putting down were the most likely, even if they didn't have the confidence in them, or more accurately, themselves, that they did before. So they still held belief and knowledge. Psychological certainty and I know. Folks can also use I know to mean I am certain of, rather than I am holding knowledge too. If we are completely honest about some of the conversations we have with theists where they claim to know God exists, when pushed for more information about how they know this, they often talk about how they feel it in their heart. If we think for ourselves, we couldn't conflate, if we think of ourselves, we wouldn't conflate feelings something is true with knowledge, would we? So being charitable, we would realize the theist also isn't actually speaking of knowledge, even if they believe they have it. Folks might conflate psychological certainty with knowledge too. In other words, they might assume you're saying that you're 100% certain about something means that you have knowledge. Knowledge without belief. Whilst it's usually accepted by most that have studied epistemology that knowledge entails belief, there are some that would argue that it doesn't. One philosopher, Carolyn Black, addressed this in her paper, Knowledge Without Belief. In reading the paper, it was quite apparent that the argument was more of a semantic one than addressing knowledge. For example, there were a few occasions where that seemed to resemble the holding information as knowledge. Just because someone has knowledge, let's say they've spent a lot of time studying evolution and understand all the mechanisms that make it work, and they give you some basic information about change in the allele frequency, but not actually covered off the whole topic, you would have the information of what evolution is. You might disbelieve this, but you would still hold the information. You might pragmatically accept the information with the understanding those who have studied evolution have more knowledge on the subjects than you, but still be uncertain if evolution is true or outright reject it. Evolution is a fact. It is therefore true. The theory of evolution explains the facts, evidence, and process around it. I think any scientist that has studied it at length can fully justify their knowledge in this, but most of us non-scientists can say we accept or believe the scientists' findings. We might say we know evolution is true, but here we're speaking of certainty and holding information rather than something we can fully justify as knowledge, unless we have spent the time reading all the papers, obviously. There were other examples of there were also examples of other definitions of belief being used too. Black quotes Johnson saying, Johnson defines belief to credit from some other person for some other reason than our personal knowledge, which says that S believe P entails S does not personally know P, but he defines credit to believe. In this, Black argues using this definition of belief is not compatible with knowledge. I would argue that Johnson is discussing a specific kind of belief. The belief is something still accepted as true, but his qualifier is that we don't have knowledge of the fact. This is fine. As I discussed, we can hold a belief without knowledge. It might, at this stage, be an unjustified belief, or it could be justified, but we just don't know if it is true or not. It seems Black is trying to argue that when we have knowledge, the belief disappears. That type of belief, for sure, but a belief is simply something accepted as true. So belief in total does not disappear. So like how someone today describes a belief as something accepted without evidence, that isn't exactly what a belief is, but it could be a type of belief. The only part of that that actually describes a belief is something accepted. Black goes on to make what I would consider a glaring mistake in discourse, one that I see many folks on the internet making today. The clearest case in which knowledge positively excludes belief are ones like the following. 1. I say that my books are in my office, and you ask, do you believe that books are in your office? I say, no, I know that my books are in my office. The problem there is saying no, because if you don't believe your books are in your office, it means that you do not accept that your books are in your office. Ergo, you believe they are anywhere but your office. It doesn't exclude belief, it entails belief. You don't not believe when you know, it just becomes unnecessary to state you believe when you know, as in have knowledge, because knowledge entails belief. It being excluded from dialogue doesn't mean it's excluded from our mental state. Just to reiterate, a discursive exclusion is not the same as a mental exclusion. Black spends a page or so going over how if she were to say, I know P, I would not say, I believe P. And again, taking discursive exclusion to be the same as mental exclusion. You would not say it because it's unnecessary to say it. Black also brings up an example like the exam student I mentioned before. If I were a Greek teacher and an unconfident student told me he did not believe he knew the Greek alphabet, but he recited it perfectly in an exam, I would say that he knew it despite his claim. See, here we're speaking of different uses of know. She's, as in Black, even qualified it with unconfident. The student doubted his knowledge due to pressure, but still believed the answers enough to present them. The student had epistemic certainty, but the psychological certainty wavered due to pressure and confidence. I'd argue that the pressure and self-doubt created a contradictory belief that made them doubt they had the knowledge, but once in the zone, their accuracy showed they did indeed have knowledge. An argument could also be made for the person not having knowledge at all and just information. They doubted they could remember the information. In this case, the Greek alphabet. After all, much of schooling, at least at a younger age, is about recycling information rather than actually learning and understanding the topic. You are often taught answers to questions without the understanding behind why that is the answer. That doesn't matter to a school. They need you to pass an exam and get a good grade. This is part of the reason why I actually separate information and knowledge. Knowing the information and having knowledge of a topic can be quite different things. In a discussion, someone was trying to tell me they know something, but they still disbelieve it. It was the example I gave above with the proposition 0.9 recurring equals 1. And the interesting thing there was I'd written this article and they then started talking about this. And so before I published it, I added it in. They said that they know it is epistemically certain, but they disbelieve it. They also argued for things scientists having knowledge of, even though he hadn't studied being a form of collective knowledge. Again, I feel this is a semantic issue of holding information and considering that you know the information to be the same as having knowledge of a topic. He argued that something or someone having epistemic certainty made it knowledge, but he disbelieved the proposition. This would tell me that even though the answer is epistemically certain, he didn't have epistemic certainty himself. He was aware that it is considered epistemically certain and pragmatically might even say the proposition is true, yet he himself did not hold epistemic certainty or knowledge.
Before you continue,
Yeah.
I had a few comments coming from the chat.
Okay.
Bearded Heretic says, words are so confusing. I agree.
Yeah.
3 Rusty Nails says, if science proves it, how can it be denied?
Well, speak to any creationists out there. People deny shit all the time.
Yeah, it can easily be denied, but that's not to say that denial is rational.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a very good point. I mean, there is if there's enough evidence to support believing the science and you disbelieve it, you're holding an irrational position there. So that's why the YEC position is an irrational position, especially once they've actually spent some time and been subjected to the science. I did make a comment a little while ago that if you were a YEC in a commune and the only books you had were Bibles and all you had was religious leaders, you could have a rational belief that no access to internet or anything like that, but you could have a rational belief that the world is only 6,000 years. But if you then leave the commune and you learn a bit of science, all of a sudden there's all this evidence against your position that you weren't aware of before. Your position is now unjustified and false.
Yeah. Okay, and Philip, who I want to say congratulations to now that we're live on air.
Yes, I forgot about that. I meant to say that at the start. Well done, mate. Very good job.
Yeah, awesome. He says, I think get-to-your problems are worth getting into when talking about knowledge.
I think they definitely are. Dave, if you would like to actually cover off some of them, we can.
Okay, so a get to your problem is basically when you have a belief that is true and you have justifications for believing it, but it doesn't actually entail knowledge. So you might say something like, I know that Joe is either streaming on Tuesday or he's in Romania. Uh, you might have justifications for believing that you're going to stream on Tuesday, um, but say you end up in Romania. They don't know that you're going to be in Romania. They're just taking a guess. But they have this argument, and that sort of gives them justification. Well, it's either this or that. So it's true, and their justification is this argument, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they have knowledge. They've just kind of gotten a bit lucky.
Yep. There's a few more as well, aren't there? I mean, I think we'll come to it at the end. I'll just read out the conclusion, and if you want, we can cover off a couple of guess your problems. Are there any more messages before we continue?
Yep, quite a few.
Oh, okay.
Um,
Are they tell
okay.
that wanker to shut up?
No, that's when they speak to me. Okay, Three Rusty Nail says that would mean certainty. Is absolute certainty possible? That would mean certainty is an absolute.
So psychological certainty is a sliding scale. I think epistemic certainty is binary. It's an absolute, isn't it? You either have it or you don't. So that's where they differ. I could be 100% psychologically certain of something, but suddenly realize I was wrong and lose that certainty, and in fact maybe make another belief. So psychological certainty is tied to a belief, and it's talking about the strength of belief. Epistemic certainty is when something definitely is the case, it's true. So if we're talking about base 10 math, 1 plus 1 equals 2. I mean, there you go. That is a form of epistemic certainty there. So I'd say, yeah, you're sort of right that a type of certainty is an absolute, as in you do or you don't. What do you think, Dave?
Yeah, that sounds about right to me. I mean, you can have absolute certainty in anything, but just because you have absolute certainty doesn't mean you're actually correct.
Indeed.
Like, you can be absolutely certain that your parents are such and such, and then when you reach 60, they die, and you find out that you were actually adopted. So
Yeah.
absolute certainty is possible depending on the angle that you're coming at it from.
Yeah.
If you're saying, can we be absolutely certain that something is correct and be correct at the same time, then yeah, I would say so. You could be absolutely certain that your name is such and such, because that's what you've been called since you were a kid. When you get older and it turns out that you were adopted and your name is actually such and such, well, that's not actually correct because your name is what you go by.
Yeah.
So whatever you're going by is your name, and you can have absolute certainty that that's your name.
Yeah. And there are some people who take an almost ridiculous stance on it, in the sense that I can say I'm absolutely certain that I'm having a sip of water. And they could turn around and go, well, what if you're in a simulated universe and you're not actually, it's just data, you're not actually doing anything at all. In that sense, you know, the only thing that you could really have absolute certainty about is the fact that you're thinking. You know, that's the only thing you could really ever have absolute certainty about. But I tend to be a little bit more pragmatic, and I go, well, even if it was a simulated universe, within this simulated universe, I am absolutely certain I'm drinking water. It doesn't matter if it's actually just data. In the parameters of my life, my experience, I'm absolutely certain.
Yeah, the qualifiers, they might alter things at the base level, but they just add contextual particularism to the statement that you're making. But the more general statement that you're making is embedded in whatever context it's being mentioned in. And it's funny you mention that because Bearded Heretic says next, you might be a brain in a vat.
Yes.
And he
Nice to
loves
see you there,
Sci-10.
dude. Sorry?
He loves Sci-10 because that's one of his famous arguments. His church doesn't love him at the moment.
No, no. Yeah, they had a bit more of a story about it. It was a vulnerable lady, apparently, wasn't it?
I'm not sure. I didn't pay attention, to be honest.
Okay.
I just saw it appear everywhere in my Twitter feed that he'd been booted from his church.
Yeah. Apparently, he took
So,
advantage of a vulnerable lady.
yeah. Okay. That sounds about right for somebody that argues such piety.
Yeah. See, I thought he
Oh,
was actually going to be a closet case, and that's why. But there you go.
yeah. You can never tell, but when they're that outspoken and that sort of performative about their belief, usually I reckon they're hiding something behind it.
Hmm.
Okay, Philip says next, unless you're a lack theist, then lacking a belief in evolution is by default rational. And then he says thank you to us.
Oh, wicked.
Or congratulations, yeah. Leon says, Dear Lord, I will never forget that conversation. I'm
Which
guessing he
one?
means the Sci-10 conversation. I'm not sure.
Yeah, don't know. Unless it was, I don't know. We've
Yeah,
had a few conversations about knowledge and stuff. There were a few on Twitter, so it was probably one of those as well.
yeah. And Bearded Heretic then says, technically speaking, we're all brains in a bone vat.
This is true.
And Opie's just come back, so hey, Opie.
Hey, Opie, how you doing? Nice to have you back. What did you buy? You gonna cook me a steak? I hope so.
And now he's got a question for you.
Oh no.
Yeah, and he even finishes it with "Mwahaha." So, do we come to knowledge from solely our reasoning or from our solely sense experience? In other words, is knowledge rational or empiricist?
Both. Ha. I think that with certain things like that, the way we do experience the world and things like that can be part of our justification for our knowledge. So realistically, there are some things that we can hold knowledge of that don't need rigorous justification. If you're trying to consider something extreme like a god existing, or understanding the entire process of evolution or anything like that, to actually hold that knowledge, you need to rigorously justify it. But realistically speaking, I would say I hold knowledge that I'm drinking water right now, and this is largely because I know what water is. I poured the water myself, and I can taste the water, and etc. So it's a combination there. There's the experience going on, plus my understanding of what water is and what a glass is, and being able to feel it. So yeah, that's the way I perceive it anyway.
Okay, a few more have come through, but we do the conclusion first and
Yeah,
then get to them.
let's do the conclusion. You're right. Conclusion. If you conflate holding information with having knowledge, or being aware of other people's knowledge as knowledge, then arguably, yes, you can have knowledge you don't believe. I would say this is a semantic game that has moved the goalpost at this point. What you have knowledge of is the information stored in your brain rather than actual knowledge of the topic the information represents. With your knowledge of information in your brain, it would be quite irrational to say you believe that information is not in your brain. So again, we have knowledge entailing belief. Ultimately, it does come down to semantics. If you separate the different uses of know into knowledge, information, awareness, and certainty, as I did above, then knowledge will always entail belief. If you decide to group all of them together as knowledge, then you can make an argument for knowledge without belief. But in doing so, you broaden the definition of knowledge to one where it becomes almost meaningless. As you know, I prefer concise, specific, accurate language, which is why I'm not a fan of the broader definitions of atheism. So it follows I would feel the same about knowledge too. In summary, there's a summary after the conclusion.
It's all good.
We can discursively say we know something without meaning we hold knowledge. With knowing and know being used in different ways, we can see how we can't know something without believing it, and I can understand how folks mistake this type of know for knowledge. It's quite clear that if a seemingly simple word like know can cause this much confusion, with the various uses fitting so seamlessly into conversation, then it's no wonder some of our other words cause even more folks to talk past each other. This is another reason why I do encourage normative definitions from the field of study you might be referring to. If you are discussing science, there is a specific definition used for theory or evolution, for example. If you insist on a colloquial definition, even if it's a popular one, there's still a chance of talking past people. The same can be said for any topic. If you're discussing religion, speak to or read papers of a theologian or someone active in or studying philosophy of religion. If you're discussing knowledge and beliefs, look into epistemology and epistemologists. If you're discussing morality, look a touch further than moral subjectivism and actually delve deep into the ethical theories and papers. When you read conflicting things, which can happen, especially when someone is trying to make a name for themselves in a particular field, it can come down to peer review or how you reason through the problem. Hopefully, as rationally as possible, using the rules of logic where applicable. For more information on how to reason through propositions using the rules of logic, check either one of those two articles. And that's it.